Yes.
All right. We are now live.
Hey.
Hi. I did post it
Hello.
on Instagram, but we'll see who tunes in. So thanks everyone. Thank you, Bernice. So I think we should start with let's have Bernice introduce herself.
As I'm preparing myself. I prepared myself mentally, and now I'm creating this physical space because this conversation it can be draining.
Yeah,
watching it and everything. So my name's Bernice. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm coming at you from HP, Huntington Park. Yes, I'm from South Central LA, but I reside in HP. I come from a history of HP residers. My mom, my dad, and all them. And I know for all those people that are interested, I am an Aries. That question always comes up.
Ooh, Aries.
I don't know my sunset
Love
or my sun.
Love it.
Yeah, but I know I'm an Aries.
Oh man.
So I don't know what's going on with my Palo Santo. Like, I don't know.
It's got a lot of machista energy there.
It must be this beard. I was telling Renee that Doctora Renee,
I love that beard. I've had that.
You had it?
Yeah.
Okay, it does the job. So I quickly grabbed it from a liquor store because I just needed a beer that day. Just it was a lot going on. Like, let me de-stress with the beer. So I grabbed it from my local liquor store, and I was like, I don't want to do all these other Trump supporting. I'm very intentional with my beer choice.
I love it.
So anything that's like the Bush Company and all that, I don't support it. I don't buy it.
Yeah, nothing.
So I was like, looks like a craft beer company. And I misread it. That was Four Peaks, which is a craft beer company. And this is Four Corners Brewing. They're in Texas. And yeah, it's called El Chingon. And I never touched it again after I realized like the name of this beer. And like literally, let me read it real quickly to you. Este India Pale Ale es puro hop machismo. It's brewed with a badass blend of mighty American hops, balanced with monarch malt and dry hopped for aromatic intensidad. Órale, crank up your chingón factor. Tu hype man está en el espejo.
Well, that just says it all. That says it all.
I had it at a local Mexican place in Whittier, near the Pico border. They had two kinds of that beer, Chingon and
I hope La Chingona.
like Valiente or something like that. Like, oh no, sadly no.
Yeah.
So I want to say before is we have to just put it out there so that it's on the record of how Bernice and we all know each other. Yeah. One is I was Bernice's high school homeroom teacher.
Yeah.
I'm like, that was a long time ago. When I was a high school teacher for 3 years. And then I think you've been following us for a while.
Yep, I've been following your work at the inception, actually, in the inception of when you both started kicking off Las Doctoras. Sorry, I'm telling you, I really need this space.
I feel it.
And I'm part of the book club. And
so you joined our book club, which was, I'm like, it's coming like in April. I think it'll be a year of the book club.
God, is it my anniversary too?
It's our anniversary. It's our anniversary. Yeah, for sure.
No plug, but I got my little shot glass. So I'm gonna cheers to that. You're right.
Yeah, salud. I'm like, I have water right now.
I need to go get something.
Mine's just water because I had a lot of champagne this weekend.
And if you're watching this, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be beer or alcohol. It can be water. Or Gatorade, whatever.
I'm like, let's get into it because I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. Well, one night I think I posted something And Bernice responded. I was like, I knew Bernice would have watched this and have a critique. So we're talking about Mariposa de Barrio, the novela based on the life of Jenny Rivera. And I just finished watching the whole, it's 91 or something
91 season 1, 91 episodes.
Well, it's a novela, like, and so that format is like different than English soap operas that run for decades. Like Spanish language novelas run for like usually a short amount of time. So it had to be for like 3-4 months that it was on. I think if it aired every day.
42 minutes each.
I want to put a qualifier on there. Number one, I guess my Wi-Fi is not so good right now, so I hope this is okay. Mm-hmm. But 2, I haven't seen the show, right? But Renee has invited me here because I am no stranger to toxic masculinity and romantic relationships. So I'm here to kind of offer my philosophical take. And I love that you're an Aries.
And I have to say, like, when I started watching it, at some point I was like, I told Christina, you should not watch it because there's.
I chose not to watch it. Right? Yeah. I mean, I
gave her the heads up.
I don't watch it.
There's sexual violence, domestic violence with no trigger warning, no like contextualization of it, no like opposing views. Like it's just so. And I think I was texting with Leslie too, and she was asking about it, and I was like, feel free to watch it. However, this is what's there. And she's like, okay, maybe I don't want to watch it. And I was like, it's a lot.
That's the beauty of this community though too. I like just if you watch it and you know like your homegirl or homie is like not gonna respond well to it, like that's important. Like this I think that's a huge responsibility that was left out to not be able to do that, because who's watching it? Like I remember as a kid I would watch novelas. So and you would, because you're with your caregivers, with your abuelita, your mom watching it. So you're watching it with them because you have no choice, because then Walter's going to come out and say the horoscope. So it's like, no, we're leaving it there. And so, yeah, I'm like thinking back, like, was this on TV? Because obviously we watched it on Netflix. And looking back, it was released actually supposedly on Netflix in 2017. And I'm like, well, who opened the Pandora box to this conversation again for everyone to kind of jump on this wagon of watching it? Because that's been a while then.
It aired on, I think, Univision or Telemundo in 2017, but then they released it on Netflix. So there was like this resurgence of like attention toward it. I was telling Bernice that I went down the rabbit hole of all the like backstory Chisme, and I started like looking everybody up and like, because I obviously when I was watching it, I was like, okay, whose version is all of this, right? Because we had similar critiques about the Selena series, and
yes,
and clearly saying like, oh, okay, this is Abraham's and Avi's version of this story, and so Selena really takes like a second, like you don't really see it through her eyes per se. And so the first thing I was like, right. I was like, okay, who, and then there's still like I haven't, I was just doing minimal research, so I haven't got like definitive answers, but I think there's some of it's based on her book that was released after she died, but she had already like I think written most of it, and then her family kind of published
Unbreakable. It's called Unbreakable: My Story, My Way, which is such a her title too. Like
and then I think some of it is based on her former was it agent or whatever those people are called.
So her former, I had read a little bit about that because I also jumped in the rabbit hole. I mean, I would be at 2:00 in the morning. I was committed.
Me too.
I was invested in this. It sucks you in. There's something about this like novela that just like you can't stop. But yeah, there was it was Univision that actually got sued because they aired an unauthorized like novela on their network based on the former agent's unauthorized book release of his version of her story. And basically there was an undisclosed or what is it called? Those statements, those legal
Oh, NDA, and
there's
non-disclosure.
non-disclosure, yes, and so he revealed things from that non-disclosure, so he got sued along with Universal.
Oh.
That's the chisme there.
No, that's so important because I was watching all these different YouTube clips, and there was one where they had like a sit down with all the family. It was like two of her brothers, her mom, and all her kids, and they were asking her like asking the family like all these back questions, and that came out. So that clarifies there was like another series that was not there was because like from what I saw, here's the chisme part, right? From what I saw of the interview, it was like, because they were asking the whole chisme around Chiquis and Esteban Loaiza, and she was like, and then they asked her about this guy, Pete Salgado, which is her former whatever manager, and she was like, fuck that guy. Like straight up, she was like, fuck that guy. And I was like, ooh, I was like, oh, there's a whole story here. So that's good to know that part of the story. So I want to really though say, like, before we get into tearing all the shit apart, is like, one thing is, I don't know she gets enough credit for who she was, and like, despite all the shit she went through, and I'm sure we can have critiques about her, but fuck, man, like, she had to stand up against a lot of shit. Like, she was a woman in a man's industry, right? Like, that machismo was so in her face. And she went up there and she was basically like, fuck all y'all. And I remember obviously I knew about her for a long time. And then when her reality show came out and I was watching it, and Tommy was always kind of like, oh, I don't, like, he's just really sometimes dismissive. And I was like, you know what? Like, I think your problem with her is that she's acting like a man, right? Like, if she were a man up on stage drinking, cussing, right? If she were on stage, like, if it was a man, and look at the people like Juan Gabriel, who was drinking wine and throwing it all over the place, and and rock stars are like smoking weed, like all of that shit, and they're cussing and all of that, and they don't get nearly as much scrutiny as she did, who was very femme, right? Like this hyper, like, sexual and unapologetic about that, but also vulgar and also like in your face and up there getting drunk off tequila. Like, I think just people couldn't handle that, like, people didn't know what to do, men clearly didn't know what to do with that. But I just was always a fan of that. And after watching this, I was like, fuck, man, she doesn't get enough, like, and I don't know. I mean, I don't want to start comparing, but I do think about Selena and how much fandom there is. And maybe I'm just not in that fandom, or I'm not exposed to that fandom, but I mean, those songs, she wrote them, composed them, produced them her fucking self. Like, chingona. That is like the, and of all the, and I'm just like, wow, like all her song, I started listening to all her music, and it's just amazing.
Playing it. So she started playing it in the writing circles.
I did. in our writing course.
Well, before I even say much, because obviously they didn't have any trigger warnings in the novela, but there's trigger warnings here. So if anybody needs to know that, there's lots of topics we're going to talk about that is just going to hit a core to your spot about different things like sexual violence and all these other machismo things. So yeah, I believe the same thing. I'm like, I mean, I was a kid growing up listening to some of her music, but like high school, I would say, like, when I started listening to her, it was, I would say, it's something like during that time, even probably 8th grade or 7th grade, that I was in, a lot of female artists, and like entering into the man's world and in the music industry. Yeah, even for example, like Britney Spears, the whole that's a new thing right now that people are talking about of what she had to go through. And that era, that's the same era of like Jenny Rivera in the 90s, like they were breaking literally breaking the wall to get to where we're not there yet, but we're in a much better place than we were then. And unfortunately, they were like the trailblazers of having to like, you know, kind of say fuck it to all these, you know, social norms and, you know, what a female should look like and what they need to, you know, how sweet, like the image of a woman. So yeah, I remember like listening to her, I would get criticism even from family, like, oh, like you're one of those kind of labor, like already categorizing me into a loca, you know, like a traviesa. But honestly, I listen to her music because I'm like, damn, I'm so used to listening from the men in my house, men singing these songs. And here's a woman singing about these songs, and now I feel validated. Like I'm a bad bitch too, or I have a voice too. You know, like even though I'm a freaking high school kid, but dang, I still wanted to claim back myself, my body.
Yeah.
You know.
I think it's important to really start with giving her so much credit for, like you said, being such a trailblazer in that industry, in music. And it means everything for little girls to be, you know, because we hear so much shit music from men. This is really just offsetting all of that, right? Like we're just like, we're going to take all that. And it's kind of like, I mean, it is feminist in nature, right? Even if she didn't necessarily use that term, I don't know. But I mean, that song that she has called Ovarios,
Los ovarios. Yes, I still use that term actually.
And I'm like, fuck, dude, like that's so, oh my God, like.
Yeah, because we're always used to like, oh, échale, no tienes huevos, right? Like like you don't have the balls to do something. I don't. I actually have ovaries and I'm using that. So
yeah, I love that. So I wanted to start with like, let's give her props. And then I'm like, where do we begin? We do have a question here and we will get to that question because I think that's important. But I'm like, we have to name again these violent depictions that are happening that with no trigger warning, with no content. I think I kept watching in the beginning to see like, okay, somebody's going to come in and be the voice of reason. Somebody's going to come in and say something. And it just essentially it never really happened. There was some subtext of things, but no one ever really straight up came out and called anything out. I mean, it starts off when, first of all, her first husband, I don't even know if they were really married, but she meets him when she's 15 and he's in his 20s. Okay, let's just say that. Let's just be clear about what that's about. And then he's completely sexually abusive, you know, physically abusive to her. And they show it. Like, there's no like, let's cut
repeatedly. It's not just like, okay, yeah, this happened in her life. It's like you're invested in that relationship already watching it and you're going through the same trauma. Like he's yelling at her and the way he's yelling at her, it's not like, you know, well, fuck you. It's like hijo de tu chingada puta madre, you know, and it's just like, whoa, I just like went on a time capsule, like traveled back into, I mean, if someone that has those experiences, if you come from a household with similar, you know, backgrounds and without those trigger warnings, you're sent back into time with that. And for those that are still living, unfortunately, like you have to, like, I don't know, this was just a lot. And so I know like people, I didn't get to finish it. I'm gonna be honest. I stopped at like episode 45. I saw like half of it. It was already exhausted. And I feel like I went through a big chunk of the drama of the trauma. And, you know, I was like, I don't think I can continue on. Like, you know what? It just, like you were mentioning, I was waiting for that saving grace, the savior. And I was like, man, this is so tragic and sad. Like, where's her help? She's alone on this. Not just in the music industry, but in her personal life.
Yeah. So. It was, and it was, I mean, like Bernice said, it was episode after episode after episode. I'm like, do they really need 20 episodes on this first husband? Like, can't we skip? You know, usually you watch a movie and they kind of skip past and they just do a montage of like crazy stuff. And I mean, you really see the full spectrum. And then what was the worst and weird is when they start getting into the sexual violence of the young girls, right? Because it's, you know, and I
even
was
the
like,
music played.
yes, it was so creepy.
It was like, it triggered you. Now I can't listen to an Ice Cream Man or whatever, or Ice Cream truck.
No, it was one of those little jewelry boxes.
Oh yes, I actually have one right here that my
how
just got
freaky.
pulled. I'm gonna show it because no, I'm not gonna show it. So then Christina can get an idea of it.
Really? It's a music box. It's a music box, like a little girl's music box. But well, okay, I don't want to associate that with scary things, but it's kind of already,
so
right? It's a little bit associated.
That's what they did.
Yeah,
that's
every time a creepy scene would happen, they would play that music. Like, and I mean, I thought, what I thought about honestly was the actors. I thought, what did they tell these little girl actors about what they were depicting? I mean, because they didn't show anything clearly, but there was still that like interaction of the
physical expression, the licking of the lips from the man and looking at the girl, and the little girl looking at him. There is eye contact there, and that was disturbing because it's like, I'm thinking the real life experience of these little girls having to work through that working environment. Like he has to look at them and crave them. He has to give that facial expression that is just like, how disturbing that is. That's, and it's not just one time. Then you have to go through the episodes and then they revisit.
They do like flashbacks. Yeah.
And it's like, do we really need to go back there again?
Yeah.
Like,
so then I want to get into what Elisa de Vargas, who's on here, because I think this is an important part of, aside from her experience of this domestic and sexual violence, was the normalization of it within her family and within her community. And even like the way his family kind of like
normalized it.
I mean, it was so weird. I was like, I want to believe that if somebody in my family was being an asshole, I mean, I would have something to say about it. Or, you know, there's just, which goes to show how normalized victim blaming is, right? But her basically her like dad's perspective was not what we don't get involved in other people's relationships. Right? Like it's not, we don't get involved in other people's marriages, right? And
even
mom,
if they're 15 years old, 16 years old, 17 years old, like,
I mean, let's talk about the mom basically kicked her out when she becomes pregnant and says, well, the right thing to do is to marry this man and to go live with him, right? And like, and that somehow saved her whatever, you know, whatever. I mean, it's a common story. And so there's
her honor,
right. So there's the layer of like the violence, the normalization of it, and then like Elisa here was saying that the tia, right? That, oh my God, I was like, get this tia out. Like, why? Like, she kept saying like they have to stay together. And anytime that she would leave him, she would say, it's, you know, like she would feel sorry for him and say the right thing to do is they need to be together and she needs to be with the father of her children. And the mom was trying to like come back at her, but I don't, again, that's where I kept waiting for somebody to come in and be like, no, right? Like, and say like, no, this is dangerous. This, you know, she like, I mean, like, yeah, this Thea was so, she finally, right? But it wasn't until he ended up being brought to trial and she still wanted to defend him.
Yeah, the whole idea, I think just that was very old school mentality. I know she seemed pretty young, but in the series, I don't know how old she really was, but she definitely comes from an old school mentality. What they say, like, you stick through when you're married with someone and your relationship through the thick and thin, you know, like through everything. They're like ride and die, and yeah, I was, oh, my earring fell. I just kind of saw her as a nuance in the beginning, and I was like wondering what is her role in this. And then in that when she the tia, the aunt, and then you know, seeing her being passive, but so she was also kind of like, she seemed one of those tias that manipulative in a way that wasn't so like, I don't know. It seemed like there was a level of respect that I guess they had her just because she was there, and then they lost that obviously later on in the show. The brothers, I think, right? Because they're like, well, how can you support him? Yeah, Trino.
Yeah.
And that changed, I think, their relationship. And I don't know how that really was in real life.
Yeah. And I think that's something important for us to say is that all of our Cheeseman judgments are based off the show. How that played out in real life, we may never know like the real stuff, but all of this is based on what was depicted in the show. And I think the major thing was that she essentially, because his defense was that the girls were lying, right? That Rosie and Chiquis were lying. And the tia came in and said, yes, little girls like make up stuff sometimes, or maybe they're confused or whatever. And so the family, that was the line, right? Like she had been years of perpetuating like this violence, but the line was, oh, now, she's kind of taking his side. And so I was like, thank God. Like when they finally cut her out, I was like, oh my God. Thank God.
That's
but
the double standard I see in families where it's like they'll treat young girls as a woman, like when she's 15 or whatever, or even younger than that. Like, oh yeah, ya está grandecita. She's 10 years old and you want the 10-year-old to do laundry, wash dishes, cook food for the family, watch the kids. But then when it comes to things that they experience, oh, you don't know nothing about that. It's like downplaying it, their children don't have lives. Like, what do you know about that? And it's like that double standard really it silences the voice for young girls.
Yeah.
It's tragic to see that. There's some people commenting.
Oh yeah. One says, I wonder how Spanish media and consumers of Spanish media would handle trigger warnings. Ooh, that's a good topic. In English media, there are trigger warnings on some shows. And it says info on the National DV hotline and suicide hotline should be given out in every single episode.
Yeah.
Every single episode, every single one, all 91 episodes. There was, a lo menos, right? At the very least. It's an interesting question about trigger warnings and how Spanish language media, I think even because there's still the system that rates shows, right? Like if they get a certain kind of rating, it's different from movies, but it'll say like depictions of violence or whatever. Like I wasn't really paying attention to if that was even there, but that's an interesting thing of like how Spanish language media handles trigger warnings. But something God, they could have written in a fake voice of reason. I don't know. Right. I kept wanting to go be and like so there's this layer of her experience, this tia, and then let's talk about the men, because really they're the ones that need to be held to the. So you have Trino, her first husband, who was obviously the worst, right? He was super violent. However, there kept being this weird, like her brother, she has, I think, 4 brothers or 3 brothers. 4 brothers. Six of them, I think. It's one Gus and Pete. Right?
Pete, yeah.
Yeah.
There's so 4 of them, and then her, and then Rosita.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they kept like demonizing, right? Like, when like they, obviously they always had something against him. And then even when this, like, they always took her side and wanted to defend her, but they were still perpetuating the same kind of mentality within their own personal lives and relationships, right? They wanted to paint as something different from them because he was physically abusive or sexually violent, but somehow them being possessive or controlling was different.
I was like, even in relationships, sexual relationships with women, they were hitting up and being with young girls too, knowing already the fact that their nieces had been raped by their own father and, by men. It's, to me, that, but it's sad that that is unfortunately normalized. It's something that I've seen growing up, that people do that. Like, not, we protect our family, but don't get into our lives. Like that's that's my business. And that's part of the machismo too. It's like, like a man's a man. It's a man's world.
Yes, I mean, let's talk about so the one brother who's married and he's like a big, I mean, they only show a little bit of it. Like they show that he goes to strip clubs, but I'm like, I'm sure there was a little bit more to it than that. Like they don't really straight up show that he had an affair, but and then all of a sudden, what do you think happens? He gets saved by God.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know Christina will have a lot to say about that, but yeah, he becomes a born again or, becomes super religious. He is now a pastor and now he's preaching about what roles men and women are supposed to play in marriages and how, like forgiveness, or he talks a lot like when the parents are going to get divorced because the dad cheats on the mom like all the time. Like,
I don't show a lot of that, but in real life, we don't know.
I mean, he was all and like straight up in her face, right?
Yeah.
And so when they're gonna get divorced, number one, all of them were like, "Oh, you guys got to stay together." I'm like, "Your mom is miserable. Why would you want your mother to stay miserable just because of this idea of marriage and what marriage is supposed to look like, or because you want that, right? Like, no one wants their parents to get divorced, but
yeah,
I mean, honestly, I was like, if my mom was that unhappy, like, why would I want to force her to be in just for me, right? Like, to me, that's like selfish, but it was incredible. And anyway, so that's the one brother story, right? Like he totally
religiosity plays a big role, and I think it's like a whole big conversation with that because it does tie into how machismo is held up, tied into that, and the forgiveness part of it. It's like, well, we can just pray about it and we'll just, well, life happens and it happens again, and it's just this whole cycle that continues.
Yeah, that was, oh my gosh, that was like, it was so annoying even up until the last couple episodes. So they showed when Jenny got married to Esteban, and he marries them, and he says the role of the man is de proteger to protect and provide. And then he says the role of the woman is to intelligently, what was the word he used? Intelligently, essentially like obey or follow or be submissive, right? And I was like, this motherfucker just told Jenny Rivera to be submissive. I was like, God damn. Like, I don't know. Again, I was waiting for the like, because
I think there's a shocking part about that for people that don't know Jenny Rivera or didn't, and to be honest, didn't know. A lot of us, I think, didn't know so much the behind the scene, her life, right? And I think that part of we see her on stage as being this fierce chingona woman. Like, who can tell her to sit down? Who can tell her to calm down? But yet behind, and I think her book demonstrate that. Like, I've went through a lot of shit. Like, behind and seen in the movie, in the novela, you see her constantly being in physical and emotional ways and other ways as well, spiritual ways. I mean, her spirit was down, knocked down so hard that excuse me. You know what? My it's still burning. It's like burning my the smoke. Like, no wonder. And I have no ventilation, so I'm like I overstaged. But yeah, like for me, it was a surprise to see that side of like, well, I'm not used to seeing her being silenced, her being minimized, her, being manipulated, but yet she had to have she had to perform, and I feel like that was her being liberated. Like, that's her, who she really was and wanted to be. And yeah.
I think two things come up for me there. One is throughout the show, I mean, because it's tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. Like, it's just a show of fucking tragedies. And I was like, I really, and maybe that's what I liked the reality show so much, because it was just her and her family being like a normal ass family, right? Like, yes, she was like super rich, but they were still a straight up like normal family. And I loved
Long
seeing
Beach, Norwalk.
like I just loved seeing how just like, super down to earth she was. And I think the show, we didn't get to see a lot of her joy, right? We just see that tragedy. And I was like, fuck, had I not, like you said, known the, like, maybe had I not seen the reality show, and I was like, God, she was, I mean, yes, she experienced a lot of shit, but we do need to show the joy, right? In these, like, and that you don't have to always be like persevering, right? The other thing is that I wonder how much of
it sounds.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know my timing's off, but it sounds like, what is it, tragedy porn kind of? It sounds and you were holding on.
Oh, yeah.
You were holding on for the saving, the light, to go off, and 91 episodes into tragedy porn and never brought resolution. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that I kind of had to word it that way. Like, oh
Yeah.
my God, this is a movie or a show. I'm waiting for, the happy ending at the end. It's such an American media,
But she did have
way of-
happy times. I mean, even when they showed her wedding, okay, like straight up, her wedding was like an event. I remember when she got married, and it was all over the papers and it was everywhere. And the way that she's still calling the old homie, like that's what they show in the series, that she's calling Fernie, right? And I'm like, it's still so male sent. And it's not to say that didn't happen, but it's like, I would have wanted to see like more of like what was the reception like? Like, did they party? Like, it was totally tragedy porn. I think that's the perfect word for it. And the thing I kept thinking was, because like you said, Bernice, there was the religiosity of her family, so much of that, like, and then because like her brother, and then I think even Rosie essentially becomes kind of like a preacher también, right? And so they're very much about, Bible verses and all of that stuff. And not to say that Jenny wasn't religious, but I guess maybe I want to believe, especially given her persona on stage, that she was a little bit more rebellious, even if she didn't necessarily verbalize it in that way. Like, I think a lot of us know how to survive in those kinds of environments by kind of doing what we need to do in certain scenarios, but then being able to find spaces to be, like you said, free and our true selves. And you're totally right. Like, on stage, that's where she got to break all of the rules, because and I don't know, it's interesting.
I remember seeing an interview with her mentioning about, like, someone brought up that of how like vulgar she was, and it, if she had any intentions of like toning it down or something like that. And she had something smart to say, because she really did speak her opinion. If you ever seen, like, they'd have to sometimes like cut it. We're not going to air that. Like, she was very, like, she meant what she said, and she didn't care like if she was on camera or not. But she had mentioned something about in the sense of like, that quote, ni santa ni punta, ni santa ni putas, right? Like, and I think that's something that, like, she was religious in the sense, like, she did believe in God, and she did have, but as this image, I think that's also part of that restraint that I think people feel like in culture wise, when we grow up in families and in that kind of cultura of like, you have to maintain this image, this saint, like, even when you're well into your 20s, sometimes for women, like, to maintain, like, oh, my parents can't know that I'm sexually active, like stuff like that. It's like, even like parents, they know, but they don't want to know. They don't want you to know that they know. So,
or it's like, it's let's just not talk about it, because there was so much of that, like, I mean, it was so freaking fascinating. That dad, like, I kept watching it, and there was maybe there'd be an episode where things were like okay, and then now, oh, there's the machismo again, right? Like, you can't go too long without it. It's gotta show up in some way, because the dad, I mean, for the most part, you know, at the beginning, I was like, oh, you know, he seems like a supportive dad, blah blah blah, and all of a sudden they're going through the divorce with the mom, and he's just like, when the kids are trying to hold him accountable, he's like, no te metes, right? Like, you don't get involved. This is between us. And then he keeps saying, well, your mom just wants to cause problems, and your mom's just being he kept calling her a martyr, that she likes to be the martyr. He would say it about her and to her face, and be like, you know, she's the one creating all these issues. He essentially says, why can't she just be happy living together and let me do my own thing? And he would go home and want his fucking food on the table, his clothes, like, basically, I mean, he was very unapologetic about saying, like, our life has worked this way. Why can't she just be happy with it continuing to work that way? And she finally was like, no, fuck you. Like, and she kept saying, like, I'm not going to let you continue to disrespect me, because it's not like it was a big secret what he was doing. Everybody knew, and everybody somehow, you know, turned the blind eye or whatever. And when the kids started finally trying to hold
Marianismo, right?
When they were trying to find, even Jenny Rivera at some point wasn't talking to her dad, and I think Lupillo too, like, they all kind of had issues because, you know, they took the mother's side, and his thing was like, how dare you turn my kids against me?
Can you explain a little bit when you get a chance? Yeah, Marianismo. I had some friends that I told them about that, and they're like, what is that? And I'm kind of, I don't feel like I gave the best explanation.
I love how someone in the chat put the machismo versus the Marianismo, or them together, and how you see that played out. The machismo even highlighted maybe even more by Protestant culture within Christianity, more than Catholicism. I'm not sure, but it sounds like that plays a part in this story. But we know what machismo is, but it's up against self-sacrificing. You know, I think Renee's going to put much better words on Marianismo. Like, you know, it's the mother who sends her children off to war to be soldiers for, you know, it's the one who is a virgin, but also a freak in the bed, actually, you know, that's that binary at the same time, you know, but in public is a total, you know, she's never had sex. She had a child, you know, from the Holy Spirit, you know, etc. You know. But Renee, give us some more details.
I think self-sacrifice is the perfect thing. It's the idea of that once you become a mom, once you become a wife, you are to serve the husband, and once you become a mom, your whole existence is about those kids. And just like the story of the Virgin Mary says, you know, she saw her son die on the cross, and so she was suffering, but that's the mark of a real woman, is to be willing to suffer for the better of the world, in Mary's case, and in our case, for the better of our children. We let go of all our own, like, we are no longer individuals. We are now only of our kids. We only serve. And Jenny's mom was exactly that. She said she gave up everything. She was a singer. That's how the dad met her. And she gave up her career. She gave up any potential to be his fucking maid and support all their kids, and without any kind of sense of individuality, right? Like, that's I think I always use a personal example. When I had my first son, and I was essentially, what I didn't realize at the time, but experiencing postpartum anxiety. And I went to my mom and my grandmother, you know, and I'm like, God, you know, I'm having all this stuff. And my mom looks at me and says, that's just part of being a mom. And my grandmother kind of looks and nods, like, yeah, like, welcome to motherhood. And I'm like, and I literally was like, are you fucking kidding me? And it took me a really long time to be like, nah, fuck that shit. Like, I'm going to therapy, because I don't believe that this has to just be my existence. And just because they have, like, doesn't mean that I have to do that, right? And that's, to me, that's Marianismo, is the idea of like suffering is just a part of the experience of being a mother.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I know you brought up the mental health part about it because it's such a taboo thing to have those to one, talk in general, and then to talk to someone else about your family problems, and that's a big no-no, and it's so taboo. But in this show, they actually did encourage, like there's a big mental health part there for Jenny Rivera. Like I think a lot of us didn't know. Like she was institutionalized, put on a 5150 hold. That's like the first experience that we kind of see throughout the show of mental health
After
being
a
brought up.
Suicide attempt.
Yeah. That, because of the trauma that she went through.
Again, with no trigger warning. The suicide attempt with no trigger warning.
Yeah. That was hard. That was really hard. And she was young. She was a minor at that time. She was not like, she was probably like 15, 16 years old, I think, right? Around that age.
And I want to say, like, again, it's I try to take it with a grain of salt because who's telling the story? But so where she was, right, this institute was a religious, center, right? Their whole thing was, they went to like Bible study or whatever. And so, I'm always like questioning, like, how much of that gets steeped in, again, still kind of perpetuating some shit. I mean, it seems like her therapist at least had some good things to help her out with, but it was interesting. Yeah. That was quite a few episodes where she's institutionalized.
Institutionalized. Yeah. And then we, fast forward when she has her kids and they come forward and tell the truth about what happened to them being, sexually violated, molested. Yeah. I think even raped her sister. I mean, was raped by. So that part too, was talked about in the sense of like seeking therapy because the sister Rosita was, for years apparently, it seemed like. I mean, they even switched, I think, actors afterwards. For years, she grew up having to keep this, secret. And that's pretty common for kids. I'm surprised that she still had that with her. A lot of kids kind of black out those memories and then those are revisited, but later. But she, they did talk about, you should probably go talk to someone. Like you need some help. You need to, talk about your issues. And I appreciated that from the show. If I could say something about it, I appreciated that from the show because normally, like, mental health and speaking to the therapist is not really something that we put on the table to talk about. We don't really encourage it so much. And I think it's,
especially in religious families, they'll say things more like, oh, just go talk to the priest or go talk to the pastor or go talk to God, right? Go pray. Like you said, rather than going and seeing help. I think Rosie has a book too, where I forget what her book is called, but she talks about her whole experience and like coming back from all of her sexual trauma. Because she essentially, the way they portray it is she's super rebellious and, I guess promiscuous and drugs and alcohol.
She did drugs and alcohol, right? Yeah. I mean, there was a scene where she like stripped down naked, right? In the city.
She was like
out here in LA.
Yeah, she was like high and like she was just on the side of the road and some like, oh my gosh, yeah, totally like tragedy porn is the right perfect word for describing the show. It's just so many different, just all the darkness, which is why, like I said, I think I was holding out hope for something, and I think that's what had me going in and looking at the behind the, like the real Chisme, and then I started like following them on social media to see like what is like they have to be living some kind of like happy lives, despite all of this.
Someone said, what? I heard Rosie's podcast on Trino, and she does attribute a lot of her healing to spirituality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because, you take this journey with this show, and in their like, in their religiosity, there's bits and pieces of it that totally make sense, right? That like, you know, and I'm like, yeah. And then it gets tied right back to like patriarchy, right? Like, and that's where the problematic stuff comes in, because at its core, you know, and I've always said this, as a product of Catholic school, I think if we really read the Bible, if we really know Jesus, right? Like Jesus was this, you know, a revolutionary. He would have been, you know, I don't know, out there calling for socialism. But but then it gets concocted because it's filtered through men, right? Through these male religious leaders, and that, you know, want to kind of distort the message and all of that. And so, yeah, so again, there was a lot of that, you know, like, yeah, her spiritual journey, you're like, okay, there's a lot of goodness there. And there's also that, you know, other kind of stuff. She says she also said some interesting things about forgiveness of one's abuser and having compassion for the reaction that family members have to sexual abuse. That was the other thing that really tripped me out, was the youngest daughter, who says she doesn't remember being abused, was really adamant about having a relationship with her father, and so this is the chisme that I found. So she talks to her father, and he's still alive in jail. And she talks to her father, and I guess Chiquis didn't talk to him for a really long time. And her sister, what is her sister's name? The second daughter. Why can't I think of it? I'm like, they're all with J's.
Jacqueline.
Jackie. So Jackie kept, I guess, wanting Chiquis to talk to their dad. And so I came across a clip of an episode of the reality show where, and I think this is after Jenny dies, that she, like, Jackie's on the phone with her dad, and she says, "Here, Chiquis talk," and you can see Chiquis' face, like she straight up is doing this, like, you know. And so she talks to her dad, and that, it was just a little clip. And then I saw another clip of her wedding, and she talks because of course in jail now he's become religious and he reads the Bible. And so on Chiquis' wedding day, she talks to her dad, and they like pray together, like before she walks down the aisle. And I was like, and then this is the chisme, right? And then I read a post by Jackie, and she has a picture of her and her dad. She went to go visit him in jail, and she goes, "I know a lot of people are not going to understand this, but you know, he's still my dad at the end of the day." And she says, "I'm not dismissing what my sister and my aunt experienced, but you know, he is my father, and I can't help but feel this way." And I mean, so I think she's trying to speak to the complexity, and I can only imagine, right? I'm not judging. It's more of like, it's like, wow, right? Like, wow, like where, like, that is a lot of.
I don't know if to see that as being a product or a symptom of the machismo, marianismo part of it, of the unfortunate part that, you know, families say, like, family is family. That's still your mom. That's still your dad. Like, no matter what the conflict was, the abuse was, at the end of the day, they're your family, and we're the only ones that are going to be there for you. And I just feel like that is just such
that's toxic.
That's so toxic. Yes, because it's almost like this is the only support that you have that you can rely on. So, you know, you're going to come back to us anyway. So no matter what happens, you know, and it's just like the hand that feeds you and the hand that also hurts you, you know, and it's just the cycle that just gets like, and that's just taboo in itself, of the topic of sexual abuse for young kids, you know, young children. And to me, it's like, when you see that played out again, who are the viewers, who's watching this, and with no trigger warnings, no conversations, no, you know, conversation after the novela to talk about, like, hey, if your kids are experiencing this, or, you know, watch the show and, you know, tell you something, this is what you can do, this is where you can go, this is what you none of that is talked about. All I know is that a kid's gonna see that and is either stay quiet,
and there's no context. There's no there's no context. That's what I think that's something to come back around to, is thinking about how without context, so let's put aside, because I think anybody's seen it and seen what Trino does. You're like, okay, we can definitively say he is a monster. But then somehow the dad and the brothers are not, right? They're valiente, they're protectors. They're just trying to defend their sister, or because even in their relationships, like the Juan, right, tells his wife, like, no, you can't go work because your job is to be here and raise my kids and, you know, and feed me, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh my God, this motherfucker. Like, so that's like romantic.
That's like,
Go, Christina.
Side
yeah,
Chisme.
yeah. It's like
and
Big Love. I don't know if you can.
Oh no, I haven't seen that.
Oh, sorry. So sorry. It's like Big Love. It's like that movie, you know, or that television show where it's about polygamy, but they compare a suburban polygamous family to backwater polygamous family. So it makes this suburban family who have multiple wives like totally normal, seem normal, you know? And that seems to be what's happening here too. You've got like the total villains, and then you have these machismo men that are just kind of machismo in comparison, you know? So it makes them seem so much better.
Yeah,
but I actually think the whole story is asking, like, I would think some viewers like us, or like some educated Latinas are listening, and they're thinking, oh, you know, I've normalized this too in my life, and obviously it's not normal. This is totally effed up, you know? I would think. I don't know.
No,
I think that's
100%.
the hope. I think, yeah. I think that's
had
the hope.
Experience of that, of like watching this show and thinking back when I was 15 and I had a secret relationship with a neighbor who was 23 years old, and the only person that knew about it was my grandma. And she saw it. I was like, well, you know, he looks good, he has a job, and you know, and it just, thinking back, I'm like, dang, she hecka normalized that for me. And I was a kid, like, you know, that was that yeah, like, and learning that the other people had similar kind of relationships that they had to hide, and there's only one people or a few people in the family that can know about it, because, you know, that's what it is in Mexico. So, you know, there's nothing wrong.
It's beyond normalizing and romanticizing it, because you said, like, your grandmother said, oh, well, he's got a job, and right, so it's like, what a good man, right? Like, to wanting to take care of you. And, you know, it's so interesting because I'm like, this gets real deep, but I've been really trying to explore my lineage, because I've never personally experienced sexual violence, but in my ancestral work, it keeps coming up that there's something there that nobody's really talked about. And so there's the story of I'm like, who would she be? My great-great-grandmother, who was an orphan and became a foster child of my great-great-grandfather and his first wife. When the wife died, he married the foster daughter. And hence my lineage comes from that. And I started asking questions like, how old was she? And what's the story? And, you know, there's a lot of vagueness around, like, that maybe she was sold to them, or, you know what I mean? There's just a lot of, and so I started to say, like, could it have been that, you know, he was straight up, you know, like, it was an abusive relationship? And oh my God, that was like, it was a lot, you know? And I think it's not that there was a denial of it. It was it was just like, we don't want that to be the case, right? Like, you know, how could that be the case? You know, that's our history. And so I think that, like somebody said, time, I think, or it says that so normalized in Latinx culture, and totally, yeah. But I think, because the way my mom sort of said it was, women at the time had very little options. Marriage was almost their way out,
yes,
of a lot of fucked up situations. So it was almost, it's like the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, right? Like, do I, you know, I imagine her might have been like, do I stay an orphan, or do I marry this man to at least have a stable life, right? And so with very little options and that generational trauma of that, I can understand why your grandmother is saying that at least he has a job, because she was of a generation that survival was everything. Love, fuck that, right? Like you marry for survival, right? You're marrying for stability. And so, but then trying to somehow tie in romance to that, right? And so it becomes this really problematic, romanticized, like, well, at least he has a job. At least he can protect and provide for you. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
I think a lot of our culture, I mean, I don't want to speak for all Latinidad either, but like a lot of Mexican songs too, and like media, like it's perpetuated. We danced to a lot of the music. Someone mentioned about a song on the radio, about 17 year like there's so many songs that I'm like now as an adult listening closely to lyrics. I'm like, ugh. Literally talking about a little girl, literally talking about, and you know, it's disturbing for sure. And it's sad because it takes away kind of like that the joy that I used to find in some of those songs growing up, but you know, it's like hidden in there. It's seated in our brains, in our culture, sprinkled around and everything. But yeah, I was gonna say about how Jenny Rivera, you know, it's unfortunate that all her partners were abusive and they all had this like almost like cookie cutter version of violence and this machismo, and it's like she went through the same experience for each man, and the men that she was dating was a reflection, I feel, of the men that were in her life. The brothers, her you know, her uncles, I mean, I know a little bit about her personal life just because of like my family and their ties with the Rivera family. But you know, it's that's the cycle of violence that we don't really talk about that either. It's like that's all you see. That's your environment. So you know, that looks familiar.
That's what was modeled.
No choices.
That's what was modeled for her, was these toxic relationships, so that she came to understand that that's what love was, right? Like that was her only. Well, these macho men in my life love me, and so that's what love is, right? Is being like this. I want to say something that was also really like you said, it was totally essentially living the same type of dynamic. And there were actually some parts that were interesting because they showed that she was violent, right? That she would like when she was with the young guy and she like scratched him. And I was like, look, that's all trauma response. Like, again, no context. It was just like, oh, well, she's crazy también, right? And I was like, nah, girl, that is a trauma response. And she's actually trying to protect herself before it happens, right? Because she would always be like hyper jealous and all that. I'm like, yeah, that's a trauma. It's all a trauma response. Not to mention that all the men in her life had a life because of her. Even Trino. He had a job because she taught him how to do real estate, and all of a sudden he has all these properties. The second one, he was her manager, and because she gave him that job, and then when they got divorced, she had to pay him fucking alimony. He lived off her almost his whole time. I'm like, the other one, the Fernie guy, right? Did you know he's coming out with an album now?
Oh.
And I guess
the second one died. The second husband died.
The second one,
I hear it in Huntington Park, actually.
Yeah, the second one died, and the guy that like she, you know, the young guy that she was always in love with,
baseball player.
He talked. No, not that was her husband, but the Fernie, the pelon guy, and she was saying, or he was saying that, like he showed her all the like industry people, and I mean, so it was just like she was their fucking savior, right? Like she's the one who made all of that, even her own family, right? The reason that her dad had such a successful recording company was because of her, because she chose to record with him. And Lupillo was like famous in his own right. But I want to say it wasn't until Jenny took off that all of that kind of, you know, came even more so. Like she was just, you know, she was a power.
His act was being played out at that time of like performing while drunk, and that's kind of that was his act. He would do that, and that's, you know, that was his initial thing. And yeah, when she popped off and she started hitting number 1, 2, you know, the records, he did really start coming back from his little hole that he was in, because he wasn't. They don't talk about that stuff, of course. No one's gonna talk about.
they were very secretive about Lupillo's, like, because most of them, they show their personal lives. They didn't show, they alluded to at one point him getting a divorce or something, but I was like, ooh, he must have not signed off on them talking about, because he's had a lot of drama in his personal life. I mean, he's got how many kids? Like from how many different women? And I mean, it's like my mom always says, typical. It's so typical.
He's still
right?
going. He has
a new wife,
like 25 years or something younger than him.
Yeah, she's super young and cute. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're adults, but
I know. I told Tommy, I said, you know what? I have decided that men, even I go, unless you're like 60 and 50, I think men in their 30s should not be dating women in their 20s. I told him, I still think that that's gross. I think in your 20s, you're still so young and still so naive, you know, not naive in a like, oh, you're not smart. It's a naive and like, you just don't have the same kind of life experience, and you're still young and so much life to you. I told him, I was like, no, when I see these 30, because there's like celebrities that are our age and dating 20 something girls, I'm like, no, that's gross. No. That's not cute, because they weren't 18.
Not
like it was not too long ago, you know, like that's, I've decided that.
I think that plays into the fuel for machismo, you know, finding younger women. Because they even talk about that when the men were looking for, you know, está lista. Like, you know, what the hell does that mean?
We all know what that
means. Yeah. You know what that means. But that's fucking disturbing. So they're always trying to find ways to go lower and lower in this age bracket.
I think anything that, you know, men have so much power in this patriarchal world that we live in. And it's already a question to me whether love can actually exist within a patriarchal relationship. Number one, I don't know if that actually can happen, you know? So, but the more power that they have by age or by class or race or colorism, you know, then I think it gets even bigger and bigger. And this story that you're telling me is one of just male saviors, you know, saving women from male perpetrators, but then male saviors are perpetrators. And it's just this really terrible cycle. It's just really terrible.
It had me landing on, if I had to go back into the dating world, I don't know. I was like, one, I don't think men would date me, because I would be way too I would be too much for. I'd be too much. I'd be like,
welcome
look,
to my world. I'm just. That's me. Hi.
I was just trying to get laid, and then maybe I play along for a second. But like, other than that, I'd be like, I don't know. Like, I think, I mean, it's not to say that I would date women only because men suck, but I think that it would be really hard to try to date men, because, man, you know, I want to say that the reason I started watching was, I think Mala Munoz posted something about, after watching Selena and Mariposa de Barrio, I've given up on men, or not men, but like, you know, something like that, where it was,
it's hard to find like a fully human man. Like, it's hard to find like a man who's has access to his full humanity. It really is.
Yeah. The emotional intelligence and all that. Yeah, that is a lot. I did see that post from Mala too, and that's why I jumped into watching it, actually, because I know her and I were on the same page. We're DMing each other on the Selena series, so I was like, let me get on this. You know, the name of I know that Jenny Rivera had a love for Mariposas, and Mariposa stands for hope, and they named it that way as well, like her show. And I think that's why it was like constantly, we're waiting for that hope, we're waiting for the hope. And since I didn't finish the show, you know, obviously we know she tragically passes away, which, again, even her death, that's part of the chisme, right, is attributed to the machismo world, the narco cartel and all that kind of stuff, right? Like, that, you know, no one really gets talk about a lot of that stuff because no one wants to get marked, but
we're like,
we can't edit that as live. But all I'm saying is that, you know, that's the she like if that is true, like she died at the end with violence of men of all her life. She had experiences, and if that is true, and it's unfortunate, you know, that this patriarchal world, you know, got end up doing that. But I hope not.
I want to say that, and we'll wrap up in a minute. But I saw this whole series. I watched it. Yeah, I finished it last night, and then it did leave me like, I don't know. I wanted a little bit more of an ending because they just show her getting on the plane and that last picture that was taken on the plane, and then so then I went and watched on YouTube the funeral, and you know, all the singers that were there and her family, all her family, and then her son was 11 years old and he spoke, and I was just like, oh, it's so heart-wrenching. And so, and the other thing was that when she died, her and Chiquis were not speaking, and that was the other
that's
part.
a big part of the Chisme.
And
right?
I've heard Chiquis talk, and she says that she's at peace because she knows that her mom knows the truth now, right? She's like, wherever she's at, she knows the truth, and you know, but I'm like, fuck, I don't know how you like that. Oh, like that would be.
And her mom left her nothing. Like before she died, she had changed the beneficiary too. So I know there was a lot of criticism about that. Like when Chiqui tried to survive after her mom died, she tried to find her talent. What's my talent? What do I need? And she was using her mom's name in a sense too, right? To be able to support herself because everything was left to Rosie. I remember because here in HP, where I live, literally down this, well, I don't want to disclose that, but in HP, in Pacific, everyone knows Pacific, El Pacific, there was, I don't think it's there anymore, I'm not too sure, but there's a Jenny Rivera boutique store there. And yeah, and that tragically got vandalized after she passed away. And that kind of intrigued me to know more about also, like, what is the story behind this? Like, what happened?
Was that the one where there was like a mural of her and that got vandalized? I know there was a bunch of chisme about that, like with like there's a lot of chisme. And the other thing is it's so hard to know what's real and what's just straight up chisme. Like what is just, you know, because that was the other thing that they showed a lot, that a lot of the tabloids were just like relentless with her, like just never really let her live her life. Like she was just always in the spotlight, and it was a double-edged sword because she needed that in order to gain success, but at the same time it's like kind of like what Britney experienced, right? And we see that, you know, where Britney's at now. So it's just, my heart goes out to Chiquis. Yes, oh my god, that's what I have nothing but love for Chiquis, honestly. Like, because she was essentially the mom to her younger siblings, you know, and took on so much responsibility at such a young age. Okay, anyway, we got to be wrapping up because we're over an hour. Any final thoughts, things we have to say before we go?
I mean, Christina, did you want to say something? Go ahead for it.
The last thing I want to say is, you know, when we're talking about patriarchy and we're talking about religion we're talking about is as a white supremacist religion, you know, and I want to just speak to how that colonial mindset, Puritan culture, you know, within Catholicism and then within Protestantism, really that sense of divine authority that and an entitlement that comes with that, and it's just so complicated, and I think there's something in there that I really want to talk about, you know, moving forward. What it is that certain religious perspectives, you know, namely the ones that have taken over our country in the last like 4 years, you know, like have impacted men of color, and given them and taken more of their humanity away. You know, I just want to say that. So
it's another form of colonization, I think. I think it's definitely that, you know, the Catholic Church colonized, and now the Protestant Church continues to colonize, and because Catholicism wasn't extreme enough, right? Wasn't religious enough. So now it's Protestantism that is it's really kind of taking over we saw that in the show Vida, right? That her dad, the same thing, right? Wasn't her dad an abuser and sexually abused her? And then all of a sudden he's this, born again pastor también. My perspective on that is that the brother, and this is super chismosa of me, but my perspective is that so many of them became singers, and that gave them their power, their fame, and their money. And he's using another institution to have his power, fame, and money through religion, right? And it's still that seeking of power. To me, it's the same thing, right? They're all seeking power in some way. So I'm like, oh, well, he just made his money and fame and all of that using religion instead of music. That's the way I saw it. But yeah, final thoughts, Bernice.
If you're gonna watch the show, know again that there's trigger warnings. Sage your house yourself.
Take breaks.
Take breaks. If things come up for you, because I'm big on mental health, definitely seek the help that you need. Go to the village that you find a safe space for. Because the whole idea of family will be family, your mom will still be your mom, your dad, everybody dad, and all that. Yes and no. And I just hope that people can I think this opens up a lot of wounds for people if you're watching this show. I mean, even if it's not tied into the violence or the sexual abuse, but just in general, how family dynamics and gender roles are played out is just, a lot for people to take in and to experience and to not talk about it and not have outlets. Not that I'm going to put a plug in, but Las Doctoras is a good place to be able to find that community as well. But, to talk about those things. So I'm thankful and grateful for inviting me for this conversation to have. I needed to get that off my chest, too, because I was just sitting with those thoughts for weeks.
Me too.
Again, still have not finished the show. And to be honest, I don't think I will finish it. Yeah. But for those personal reasons as well of protecting my energy and my spirit. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone who was here live commenting. We appreciate it all. También me, I was like, oh my God, I need to have a conversation about this. I need to deconstruct. I need to contextualize because it's a mess. So yeah, thanks for being here and talking about the mess.
Cheers with my beer.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks.
All righty.